In December 2025, for the first time in German history, a party labeled far-right became the most popular in the country. And it's not just Germany. France, Austria, Netherlands, Sweden, across the continent, parties that mainstream media calls extremist are either in power or leading the polls. But nobody tells you the truth, that these aren't neo-Nazis marching with torches. They're normal people, Christian parents, workers, and youth, who've been pushed to the edge. And the more the establishment tries to silence them, the stronger they become. This is the story of how Europe's right-wing political earthquake became inevitable. To understand why we're here, we need to go back to 2015. That's when everything changed. German Chancellor Angela Merkel made a decision that would reshape European politics forever. With almost no parliamentary debate, she opened Germany's borders to 1.2 million asylum seekers, most of them young Muslim men from conflict zones. Her famous words were, "Wir schaffen das," we can do this. But within months, the cracks started showing. On New Year's Eve 2016 in Cologne, over 1,200 women reported being sexually assaulted in coordinated attacks by groups of migrants. Similar incidents occurred across Europe. Terror attacks in Paris, Nice, Berlin, Brussels. Stabbing incidents became almost daily news. The establishment's response was to downplay the statistics, censor the reports. Anyone who questioned the policy was immediately labeled racist and risked losing his livelihood. Fast forward to 2022 to 2025. Germany, once Europe's economic engine, began its spectacular decline. Energy prices skyrocketed after Nord Stream's destruction. Nuclear plants were forcibly shut down for climate goals, although massive energy shortages existed. The debt brake, Germany's strict fiscal limit, meant the government couldn't spend its way out while simultaneously funding welfare for millions of new arrivals. BASF, Volkswagen, major manufacturers started announcing massive layoffs or complete relocations to America and Asia. Working Germans watched their living standards collapse while being lectured about accepting less for humanity and the climate. By late 2025, official statistics showed something undeniable. Non-German nationals were committing roughly 40% of violent crimes, despite being only 15% of the population. But mainstream politicians kept claiming that crime has nothing to do with migration. And let's not forget about the cultural shift. Compulsory gender language in schools, drag performances for children, early sexualization curricula. To many Germans, especially in the East who'd already lived under communist authoritarianism, this felt like another ideology being forced down their throats. Meanwhile, new arrivals faced virtually no integration requirements. Parallel Islamic societies formed in major cities. Native Europeans rightfully felt that their culture, their traditions, their concerns were not a priority for the establishment. The COVID lockdowns were the final straw for the narrative. Germany had some of Europe's longest school closures and harshest restrictions. Then reports emerged of the same politicians who imposed strict lockdowns, profiting massively from mass contracts, earning hundreds of thousands from favorable government contracts. Any ounce of trust that was left shattered immediately. So when parties like Alternative for Germany rose up saying enough, what did the establishment do? Did they listen? Did they address these concerns? Of course not. They doubled down. In France, Marine Le Pen, whose national rally consistently polls at 30 to 35%, has faced trial after trial. In 2025, prosecutors pushed for a conviction that would ban her from running in 2027. Her supporters call it what it is, using the legal system to eliminate political opponents when you can't beat them at the ballot box. In Romania, it got even more extreme. In 2024, Colin Georgescu won the first round of presidential elections on an anti-EU sovereignty platform. The establishment's response? They literally annulled the entire election and banned him from politics on vague extremism charges. Think about that. They canceled a democratic election because they didn't like the result. And then they have the guts to call the ordinary person fascist. And here's the crucial distinction nobody makes. These parties aren't fascists. They're not third positionist or ultra-nationalist calling for totalitarian rule. They're conservatives, Christians, people who want controlled borders, law and order, and their culture preserved. They believe in democracy, free markets, and national sovereignty, but the establishment lumps them together with actual neo-Nazis to delegitimize them. It's a deliberate tactic. If you can't defeat the argument, smear the person making it. In Germany, the AfD was labeled definitively right-wing extremist by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution in May 2025. Yet they hold 94 seats in parliament. They're the largest opposition party. They are not violent thugs. Neither are they planning to coup the government. They're just winning the hearts and minds of the populace. The extremism label became a weapon to justify surveillance, funding cuts, and social ostracization of anyone associated with them. But what the establishment didn't anticipate was that every accusation, every trial, every attempt to silence these parties only made them more popular. When you tell working-class people their concerns about crime are racist, they don't suddenly agree with you. They get angry. The cordon sanitaire, the mainstream party's refusal to work with these far-right groups, didn't contain them. It turned them into political martyrs. Which brings us to today, December 2025. And the numbers are stunning. Germany's AfD isn't just competitive, they're winning. Recent polls show them at 26 to 27%, making them the most popular party in the country. They've sustained this lead for months. In eastern states like Thuringia and Saxony, they're over 30%. But here's what's really shocking. They're expanding westward. In North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany's most populous state, they tripled their vote share to 14.5%. And it's not just older voters. AfD is now leading among under 30s in multiple regions. Young Germans who grew up being told they should feel guilty for a past they weren't a part of and didn't support are rejecting that narrative entirely. And we're seeing the same thing in the entire continent. France's national rally is at 30 to 35%, the strongest they've ever been. Netherlands' Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom is in the governing coalition. Italy's Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, a party that's into mainstream conservatism, is running the government. Sweden's Sweden Democrats, once pariahs, are now kingmakers with nearly 20% support. Austria's Freedom Party finished first in recent elections. This isn't a fluke. This is a continental realignment. So why is this takeover inevitable? 3 reasons. First, the problems are getting worse, not better. Migration continues. Crime statistics keep climbing. Economic decline accelerates. Every mainstream solution has failed. Second, demographics. Young Europeans are increasingly right-wing. The generation that was supposed to be the most progressive ever is rejecting progressivism because they're living with its consequences. The establishment has no credibility left. When you've called half the country Nazis for a decade, when you've censored and lied and manipulated, what do you do when real problems need real solutions? Nobody believes you anymore. Expert forecasts now put the probability of far-right-led governments in at least 2 more major European states by 2027 at 60 to 70%. If economic conditions worsen, and they likely will, that jumps to over 80%. The cordon sanitaire is cracking. In some countries, it's already broken. Once these parties actually govern and people see the sky doesn't fall, the taboo disappears entirely. The thing is that this was entirely preventable. If mainstream parties had listened to concerns about immigration instead of calling them racist, if they'd prioritized their own citizens' safety and prosperity, if they'd been honest about integration challenges and Islamic extremism, none of this would be happening. But they didn't. They censored, they lied, they smeared, and they created the very monster they feared. The parties they call far-right aren't taking over Europe through some authoritarian coup. They're winning because democracy is finally working. People are voting for parties that actually address their concerns. The establishment's worst nightmare isn't fascism returning to Europe. It's that the people they've ignored for decades are finally being heard, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. The question isn't if the political map of Europe will change. It's what happens when it does.
Click here, click here, click here.